Breaking news from Washington, where they are confident that India will soon come to the White House with an apology and stop buying Russian oil, and will beg Donald Trump to lift all trade tariffs. Trump's inner circle is confident that India will soon apologize and stop buying Russian oil. This information appeared in Western media today. Where did it come from? The thing is, United States presidential advisor Garrett Ziegler said on Bloomberg that New Delhi will soon clarify and adjust its position. And at the same time, in the same information flow, there's the idea that the White House will put more pressure on the largest buyers of Russian oil. That's the kind of information crossroads we have. Let's figure it out together. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is September 6th. Before we start this episode, I want to make a little confession. You know, from being overwhelmed with news and constantly working with the news feed, once a week I pour my heart out to a psychologist just so I don't burn out. But if you need a gentle daily push to take action, then I want to recommend a good YouTube channel to you, where every day there are short videos from a psychologist about how to get out of procrastination, gather your thoughts, and avoid burnout. And not only that, it's a normal, practical tone without, any pseudo-guru stuff. That's why I recommend this YouTube channel. I'll leave the link in the description of this video, and I suggest you subscribe and save a couple of videos to watch again.
Boundaries mean honesty, not coldness. You don't need to be available constantly to be loved.
Let's start with real facts. What is New Delhi's position? India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman recently said something quite simple. India will continue to buy Russian oil if it is in our national interest. And this isn't a signal for the domestic market. This is the position of the Indian government, which has been taking advantage of Putin's discount on Russian oil for 3 years now. Just the maximum. They need to lower oil prices for India and China. The discount is up and the rent is down. But that doesn't mean New Delhi will immediately give up cheap raw materials, so there's no reason for India to give these up. How is this connected to Russia's war against Ukraine directly? Because every barrel of Russian oil that goes to India at a discount turns into what's called a grey blend and is partially re-exported to Europe. This is actually the most interesting point. The thing is, we've already discussed this with you on this YouTube channel. India buys crude oil from Russia at a discount, then relabels it and sells the same crude oil to Europe. Europe says, listen, we don't buy Russian oil, and technically that's true. They supposedly buy Indian oil, but in reality everyone understands perfectly well that this oil is actually Russian. And that's exactly what Trump, said directly to the Europeans during a coalition call today. He stated that you Europeans are fueling Russia's war against Ukraine through India. Axios and Bild covered this. Trump was blunt. Europe must stop fueling the war with Russian oil and put pressure on China. Well, Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, directly accused Europe of buying Russian oil from India during the summit in Paris on September 4. And he stated that it's time to stop being hypocritical, lay all the cards on the table and show that you are buying Russian oil, but in a roundabout way. But of course, this toughness has a gap. The White House itself still hasn't imposed secondary measures against China, limiting them to India. Because Trump is now demanding that Europe also impose sanctions against China, hinting that, look, we hit India with our tariffs and you should hit China. Well, we don't dare to do it, so you should take on this issue. Otherwise, we'll tell the whole world that you're buying Russian oil. Trump hasn't joined the European price cap on Russian oil at $47.6 per barrel yet. He hasn't imposed new sanctions on the shadow fleet. These are also facts. And, it's convenient for Donald Trump's team to forget them and pretend like, listen, we've done our part. Now, why? The demand for an apology to India is very dangerous because Indian domestic politics does not operate according to the logic of public submission. Asking New Delhi to apologize for a policy it publicly calls sovereign is guaranteed to get a no in response. That means the conflict shifts to the economic sphere: insurance, freight, fleet leasing, and port bans. The issue of these oil blends and their origin Here, the European Union has a real lever, lowering the price cap on Russian oil even further. This is a hunt for the shadow fleet, with bans on docks and insurance for ships carrying grey oil. Moreover, if Europe really wants to show that it not only talks but acts, it knows perfectly well which of the barrels of oil from India is actually Russian. So just stop buying it. On the other hand, if Europe synchronizes these filters with Britain and Canada, then the cheap blend won't be so cheap anymore. Indian refineries, they are of course pragmatists and understand that if the margin drops, this whole scheme will simply collapse. And that's better than any of these public quarrels. It's better than public statements that India will soon come crawling and apologize. If you look at this situation with a cool head, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Yes, Europe should shut down these grey routes, and for its own sins, it should also be held accountable. Yes, India is playing hard in its own interest and will continue to do so as long as it benefits them. You know, as long as the impact from Trump's tariffs is a bit less than the profits from cheap Russian oil, they will keep buying that oil. Yes, the United States can apply pressure, but should use leverage instead of slogans. For Ukraine, this is the best outcome. This isn't a public apology from New Delhi, as they're saying in Washington right now, but rather a boring yet deadly kind of engineering. Fewer insurers, fewer documents, more checks on the origin of the oil, more blacklisted tankers. And that's why oil in this context isn't just symbolic, it's the war budget. That's why we need action, not loud statements. And finally, about the reputation of the United States of America, which Trump destroyed, as headlines like to say these days. Today, The Atlantic writes about America's reputation. This isn't just one person's interview comment, it's a series of decisions, sanctions, missions, and commitments. The White House urges Europe to pressure China and stop grey schemes. But it doesn't sign the European cap on Russian oil prices itself, and doesn't hit the Chinese routes as hard as it does the Indian ones. So, reputation isn't about who shouts louder, it's about who actually does something. And here Washington has room to work. Therefore, as a conclusion, I want to say that trying to break the Indian position with public apologies is a losing strategy. The practical way is to make grey schemes more expensive and risky. Insurance, ports, docks. Europe is already taking action on what we discussed, while the United States faces a choice: get involved or continue with public criticism. Now this is interesting, because you can shout that India will soon come and change, or you can just hit the shadow fleet with sanctions. You can support the Russian oil price cap and more. For Ukraine, the moral here is simple. The lower the margins for blends, the faster the war budget will deflate. And apologizing, well, that's for headlines, not for victory, so I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.